All right. In chapter 16 yesterday, we talked about random variables, and then we talked about probability models, and then we talked about finding the average for that probability model. So the average was the expected value, right? If we talk about a mean, our measure of center, we also talk about measure of spread. And so we need to find, if we talk about the mean, we always talk about the standard deviation. All right? So we need to be able to find the standard deviation, and there's a formula to get there, but we need to find the variance first, which is a new term. The variance is just the standard deviation squared. Right? So we're going to find the variance because we have an actual equation that will get us there. And then once we do that, then we can take the square root to get the standard deviation. So here are the formulas. The one in the box is the variance. Sigma is the standard deviation, so standard deviation squared would be sigma squared. This is on the formula sheet. It's underneath expected value from yesterday. So the first four probability equations on the formula sheet have been in chapter 15 and 16. So what you do is just like we talked about when you find standard deviation back in chapter like 5 or 6, way back when. You're finding how far a value is from the mean. So what you would do is you would take each individual outcome minus the mean, which in this case is the expected value, and square it, and multiply that difference squared times the probability of that outcome occurring. So I'm going to show it to you once by hand, and I'm going to show you how you can use your calculator to do that for you. So, in order to do this, we have to have an expected value. So here's the probability model. We'll just do A. We need to find the expected value first. So how do you find the expected value? We talked about yesterday. You multiply the outcome times its probability, and then you add them all together, right? So 10 times 0.3 plus 20 times 0.5 plus 30 times 0.2. So if we calculate that, yeah. So 19, right? Because you add all those together. Then in order to find the variance, what you would do is again, the formula is the sum of the outcome minus the mean squared times the probability of that outcome. So, if we're going to find this, we would need to do these one at a time. So we start with this column. So we have, I'm going to take a little bit of space. 10 minus the mean, 19, squared, times that probability, 30%. Plus 20 minus 19 squared times probability, 50%. Plus 30 minus 19 squared times the probability, 0.2. Right? That's what the formula says to do. I'm going to try to save myself some time before I type all this in the calculator. 10 minus 19 is negative 9. Negative 9 squared is 81. Correct me if I'm wrong. 20 minus 19 is 1, and 1 squared is just 1. And 30 minus 19 is 11, and 11 squared is 121. Everyone agree? Yeah. That'll just make this easier for me to type into my calculator. So we have 81 times 0.3 plus 1 times 0.5, so 0.5, plus 121 times 0.2. We get 49, right? Now that's just the variance. The question actually asks us to go through and find the standard deviation. So if we have the variance, and you want to find the standard deviation, you just take the square root. Since the variance is the standard deviation squared, you just take the square root to get the standard deviation. So the square root of 49 is 7. Now, this comes up a lot on the free response section. I've seen a lot of questions about expected value and variance and standard deviations and probability models. If you're doing a free response question, you need to write out the expected value, not just give a number. If you're trying to get full credit, you should write out E of X equals, and then write out everything being multiplied and added. Okay? Like you should write this whole thing out. It doesn't take very long. Okay? Then to the variance, you don't have to show all the work. If you don't show work and you miscalculate something, you can't get any credit. So it doesn't take super long generally because they don't have millions of outcomes to write out the equation for the variance. All right? However, I do understand that you have a time test, and so you don't want to spend time upon time upon time trying to calculate everything, right? Writing it out is one thing, but then going back to actually calculate and type everything in takes more time. So I'm going to show you how your calculator can then help you out. So we're going to use lists in order to do this. All right? So if you go to Stat Edit and you go to your lists, you're going to type in your outcomes in one list and your probabilities that are associated in the next list. So you're pretty much putting your probability model into table form in your calculator. So 10, 20, 30. And that was 0.3, 0.5, 0.2. Just make sure the probabilities that go with the right outcomes are next to each other. That's going to be important. Now, if we wanted to find means and standard deviations and everything before, we always went to stat calc one variable statistics, right? We're going to do the same thing. So stat calc one variable statistics. Now, yours should say list should say L1, and your frequency list should probably be blank right now. We haven't used the frequency list this year because we haven't needed to. This is what the frequency list does, just in general. It really isn't made for this type of problem. It just happens to work in our favor, all right? The frequency list is, let's say you have a list of data. You have 100 numbers, okay? Because you did some survey or something, I don't know, but you have 100 numbers. Those 100 numbers, though, are all just digits 1 through 5, all right? So it's not just a bunch of random values that people came up with or you got from some experiment thing. It's just 1 through 5 are all the 100 numbers. Well, so instead of typing in 100 numbers, you could have counted how many 1s there were and counted how many 2s there were and counted how many 3s and how many 4s, how many 5s. And you could have put that in kind of table form like we just did. You could have put 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 as list 1 and then how many of each there were in list 2, right? So by giving a frequency list, what it's going to do, it's going to calculate a weighted average, and it's going to calculate the standard deviation based on the variance idea because that's what you have. You have this table, all right? You're saying you have this outcome with this probability, just like you would be saying you have this many 1s in my data set. Okay, so it calculates it for you, it's just not really what it was made for. Okay, so your frequency list should be your probability list then. So if you have list 1 and list 2, if you use list 3 and list 4, whatever you use. If you calculate this, the mean is still x bar. The mean of our problem just now was 19, right? So that's right. Now, in this case, remember sigma is the standard deviation. So it gives us the standard deviation of 7. It does not give you the variance anywhere. There are several questions where you need the variance instead of the standard deviation to do something, or they ask you for the variance specifically. So if you're given the standard deviation is 7, then you square it to get the variance. So you know it's 7, you square it, you get 49 as the variance. All right? After Thanksgiving, when we do some more stuff in this chapter, sometimes it's more appropriate to use the variance than it is the standard deviation. We'll get into that later. Okay? But for today, does everyone understand the calculation, that formula is on the formula sheet, and that you could write it all out, or that you could use your calculator to get the standard deviation? The assignment is just going to be finding standard deviations, pretty much. It's just tacking on that little bit from yesterday. Can you do it mathematically? Is your calculator's different and I can't figure out your calculator? We'll look it up in the other book. 1 second. I'll look at yours. Okay, before you guys get antsy. So the problems I'm giving you are due Tuesday because I'm not going to see you. But the problems I'm giving you, there's a few more models that are new. All right, so new models, try out. Then 10 through 12 in the middle, ask you to go back and do standard deviations for the 3 homework questions from yesterday. That's why I said if you have the probability models, you already have it started because you already have the expected values. So you can already start the standard deviation situation. All right. And then 16 and 17 are new questions, but they give you pretty much the information. They don't give you a model on both of them, but they give you all the information you would need to find the expected value in the standard deviation. So you don't have to do any extra thinking, really. Okay. So here's the assignment. Again, it's due Tuesday.